Hey, good day everybody. Welcome back to the channel. Well, I've been thinking about writing emotively, how to express emotions in your writing. And this is really about writing for yourself. There are certain things I discovered that makes my writing more expressive of the way I'm feeling. It's not necessarily proper grammar or sentence structure, but it's something that helps me express myself better on paper. And I thought we'd talk a little bit about that today. Stay tuned. Well, of course, there are established rules of language, sentence structure, and diction, etc. But on January 2nd of 2022, I found myself sitting down at my Singer electric typewriter. This is made by Smith Corona. And I was just typing some random stuff, and I started finding myself setting the color selector, the bichrome setting on the typewriter, to red occasionally during this piece in order to emphasize certain words or phrases. Also, I was doing red underlines, and I began to notice that by using this bichrome effect on the typing, by emphasizing certain words and phrases and sentences in red, that I was emphasizing parts of speech the way you might emphasize it when you're talking. Another way of putting it is when you're reading someone's printed work, you don't necessarily hear their voice. The emphasis in the voice, certain words get emphasized more than others. You have to kind of put that emphasis in your mind as you're reading it, and sometimes it's a little difficult to hear that voice as you're reading someone else's work. But I noticed here that I was using these typographical effects of the typewriter to simulate that vocal emphasis. And so on this page, I began to write, and I started emphasizing these words in capital letters, such that it sounds like I'm saying, so while typewriting is faster than handwriting, hand correcting is easier than type correcting, because so many of them are alternative means of speaking, not just writing. And the speaking is emphasized in red. And then on the next page I said, because it's the second day of the 22nd year of the second millennium, I'm typing this on the Hermes 3000, which makes no sense. Thank you very little. And further down the page, we have arrived at the place where the cleverness has suddenly worn off, and we are then left with a hangover of regret and mental anguish at the dilemma of how shall we entertain the reader? So this is kind of the emphasis of how I was thinking about these words as I was typing them. And then I say down at the bottom of the page, there will be no remembering, dear writer. You only write for yourself. Never forget that fact. You're writing for your future self, whom you hope will be a better writer than your present self. And then I switched typewriters to the Splendid 33, which does not have a bichrome setting. And I was continuing in this same style, but using just capitals as the form of emphasis. So here I write, because this is now the fourth page I've typewritten today, the first being a blog article about my mental model of time its very self, and the other two being stream o' consciousness pieces on two different machines, I thought it appropriate to continue in this same vein using my currently favorite machine, the venerable Olympia Splendid 33. And I was using the Splendid 33 sitting atop a folded up large bath towel as a form of sound dampening, and I wrote, this is the age of Turkish bath towel typing pads. We spare no expense. You are worth every penny. So again, a slightly humorous, at least to myself, little typing there, but using capitals to form that kind of vocal emphasis. And now that I'm on a roll, I switched over to my Royal Mercury, which has a red-black ribbon, and further down the page I write, but also, maybe it's the raised position atop the Turkish wrestler bath towel of ultimate luxury. the latest trend in typing pads. Look it up, son. Do I have to do all your work for you? Thought not. Okay, silly stuff. I'm typing to myself. But again, this red colored lettering, I'm trying to emphasize. I can use the Splendid 33 with this paper and just type within narrow columns for an appropriate blogging format so as not to make the lines of text too lengthy and hence less readable on the diminutive screens of youth. So I like that phrase, diminutive screens of youth, and I went ahead and, of course, emphasized it in red. Okay, then about a week later, on the 10th of January, I was writing with the Hermes 3000 once again, and I was writing notes for this typewriting versus hoarding video, and I was starting to use the same technique of emphasizing phrases and words. What I have down here in point 4, as a typewriter's first, i.e. a writer who happens to type, your social circle, Facebook et al., should include at least as many writers as typewriter collectors. Your interest needs to focus more on the writing part because unchecked hoarding comes naturally, while consistent writing only comes through disciplined focus. So again, I'm kind of using this typographic effect to simulate verbal emphasis of spoken words. Now, what if you have a single-color typewriter like my Splendid 33 that lacks the bichrome feature, and you want to actually highlight words after the fact, after you've written them, so in other words, you didn't actually type them in capitals? Well, this is another way you can do it, as I was underlining certain words or phrases with a red pen and using a straight edge to make it look nice and neat. So in this little note to myself, I said, I've had 2 good writing-related things this week that make me feel good about my creative work. The first is a little essay I wrote and published onto OTP, etc., etc. And later on I say, the second positive thing is the recent typewriter video I made that speaks to being a writer who typewriterly writes. I love that because it's so wrong. It's so grammatically wrong, it's actually very fun. So my point here is that you can actually practice this highlighting technique for simulating verbal emphasis after you've already typed the sheet, just by using like a red marker or whatever, red pen to do the underlining and the highlighting of it. And then I switched to my Triumph Norm 6 with the German keyboard, and I wrote, so maybe I'll put this on the top of the stack for these 2 German machines for when some Teutonic rants are coming due. I love that, Teutonic rants. Yes, I think this red emphasis works really well in some of these kinds of phrasings. So while this technique of using typographical effects to simulate verbal emphasis in verbal speech is effective, it's not necessarily proper grammar or proper sentence structure. But for the purposes of my writing, at least in these entries in my private typewritten journal, that's fine because I'm really writing for myself. So you wouldn't necessarily want to use this technique for material that you were going to publish or in some ways disseminate unless you thought that it might more effectively communicate your thoughts and especially the manner in which you speak, to be able to simulate that on paper. It's interesting, of all the effects, right, you can use like red lettering as highlighting, you could use capitals, and you can use underlining in a different color like red. And of all those techniques, I seem to think that using the red lettering as an alternative to the normal black is most effective visually, especially if you combine it with capitals, like red capitals seem to be most effective, which is interesting because if you're using a word processor to write, you kind of have to go into some special formatting features in order to have, for instance, certain words highlighted in red. So it is interesting that we can do that with typewriters, at least typewriters that have a bichrome feature. I hope this was encouraging and inspiring to you guys to, as you write for yourself, if you write a private journal, diary, typewritten journal, maybe start using these typographical effects to emphasize the emotion that you're trying to represent to yourself. If things are bothering you or you have something you want to express emotively, using these techniques, underlining, capitals, using an alternative color or a combination of those three really works well. And I encourage you to try that in your own private writing and maybe share it with other people in your published writings, your blogs, one type page blog, however you share your typings with other people. Well, this is just a fun little thing that I discovered along the way while I was writing for myself. And these are the kinds of discoveries that we make when we do create for ourselves. I think play is very important to being creative. You need to sit down at your typewriters and just play around with words. Give yourself the freedom to create. And I hope you stay creative. Have a great day. Bye-bye for now.